Okay, so we should be coming up on live on Facebook here. And if I go to okay, yeah, I'm live there. I can see that. Good. So I think we're just about ready to go. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Patricia, could you go get my water? I forgot to bring it. I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay, I think we're recording on both places now, so we can get started. I'm going to go ahead and start with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with his commandments and commands us to engross ourselves in words of Torah. Okay, I want to welcome everyone here again tonight for this installment. And tonight we're going to be talking about some continued miracles in the ministry of Elisha. And so we're going to begin with, and I've already gone through all of these these things here tonight. There's some of the things we're going to be talking about up here around Samaria, and then right north of that is Dothan, Dothan, Israel, not Dothan, Alabama. So, and we're still right here with Elisha, and that hasn't changed any. We're still in that era there. Okay, now before we get into the actual lesson, because the first miracle was talking about an axe head that had flown off the handle, so to speak, I thought, well, why don't we kind of take a look at some things that some iron works or iron axe handles and or axe heads. And so what I found was over here to the right hand side, there's just a whole bunch of old axe heads that they found someplace. And some of them, they're kind of decorated, and some of them are not. And then there's one over here on the left that's a different style, different kind altogether. And so we really don't know exactly, what kind of axe head this was that they were using. But anyway, there's a couple of axe heads. And then what I did was I thought, well, let me see if I can find something about the iron works and iron, doing smelting. And so what I found was a lady in Israel. She doesn't look like she's old enough, but she has a PhD in some kind of archaeology stuff, and so she's there. She is. She's a PhD deity, getting her hands dirty, and you can see she's got her face already dirty. So that's my kind of PhD, one that'll get out there and get dirty. And so what she wanted to do was to show, try to come up with a way that how did the Israelites in the Iron Age make iron implements? And so I'm just going to, there's an article written in Haaretz, and so I give them all the credit for this thing because I just copied it, but it was interesting, and I'm going to go ahead and read it. The Iron Age was as a turning point in the history of the land of Israel. Iron tools began to appear around 3,000 years ago, and so that would be around 1,000 BCE, and gradually supplanting the softer copper and bronze tools. And you'll remember then that Israel had a time of it when they were fighting the Philistines and others that had iron tools, and they only had iron weapons, and Israel only had bronze weapons. So it was also a time of dramatic political change as the Hebrew kingdoms, Judah and Israel, began to take shape, which may or may not have to do with the advent of iron. However, it has never been quite understood how the ancients actually produced their iron. Regarding the copper that preceded iron, archaeologists know where it was mined and smelted, thanks in no small part to advanced chemical analysis. It's never been proved, for example, that Cyprus was a key source of copper for the northernmost corners of Europe thousands of years ago. And that can't be said for iron. Excavations around Israel have unearthed the rusted remains of ancient iron tools, and in some places slag from iron production as well. But the scientists know very little about where the iron was mined, how the iron-bearing ore was processed as a raw material, or even how it was then smelted. And however, there are only so many ways that the people of Judah in the ancient world could have generated temperatures high enough to extract the iron from the ore. And this lady, Dr. Adi Eliyahu of Ariel University, set out to recreate a long forgotten process. Now, using means that could only be available at the time and common sense, Dr. Eliyahu, who studied chemistry and archaeology at the Weizmann Institute in Rehovot, and her colleagues set out to make iron the old way. Now, the first stage was to gather up iron-rich rocks, which was done from two streams in the Negev, Nekarot, and Paran. Rocks with iron can be identified by their reddish color. And so the next stage was to heat the rocks in an open fire, which reached a temperature of about 500 degrees Celsius. Then the hot rocks were pulverized into fine gravel. Then they were placed in a tall, narrow kiln made of strong clay. And so here you can, together with coal. So here you can see this tall kiln here. Oh man, I even got my wife's attention here. So, and so, here's a picture of where they fairly far along in the process where they've melted this stuff down, and the slag is coming out the bottom. And so the kiln had an opening for ventilation at its bottom. This crude furnace could reach a temperature of 1,300 degrees. Okay, and so and it is true that the researchers gave themselves some wiggle room. Their predecessors in smelting 3,000 years ago definitely didn't use electric bellows and hair dryers to create the airflow. On this one here, it showed them. I saw a video of it, and I would have just shown you the video, but I've never had any success with trying to put up a video while you guys are and still doing this stuff. So so I just did screenshots and so forth. And so it's kind of cool here. She's dumping these rocks, the iron ore and bits of coal and stuff in the top of it in a plastic bucket. Okay, so 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 I mean, here she is pouring this pouring this stuff into the top of it, and it's really hot up there on top, and she got a plastic bucket. And I noticed that, yeah, it did melt the rim of it when she was done with it. But anyway, they would have used they would have used slaves or workers with a bellows. A leather bellows kind of a thing. You've seen those in blacksmith shops. Where the thing it's puts air into the kiln, and then that way it really increases the temperature. So, and here's like the bottom of the furnace, and you can see over here where they've got this hose, and on the other end of that hose is a hair dryer that's blowing air into that, and so all right, so here we go. Then, but the process that she made up here is apparently similar to how iron was made in those times. And so after about 4 years of burning ore, 4 hours of burning ore, occasionally adding more and feeding the kiln more coal as needed, an opening is made in the bottom. They kind of poked a hole in the bottom of the furnace to let out the molten slag. Now, inside the belly of the kiln was a lump of iron ready to be worked into tools or whatever. It was rather like a berth, Eliyahu says. The 35 kilos of ore produced 7.5 kilos of iron. So 35 kilos is about, it would be about 80 pounds of ore produced, 15, 16, 17 pounds of iron. And one of the team members, Lee Sauter, an American researcher who uses iron, who produces iron using ancient technologies. In a separate workshop, he made a small knife using the smelted iron that they had. So then another team members built a variation of this design of the iron foundry, and he operated his with 3 hair dryers. So, but again, it shows that these are educated. They're just educated guesses, really, because we don't really know. Now, there hasn't been a single ancient facility to make iron has been discovered in Israel, and the reason for that, one of the theories is that because the ancient furnaces that were used like this, they were only used one time, and so they could heat the stuff up, and then they would just break the thing apart to get the iron out, then before they started working it. And so it was just a one-off thing each time, so that's why none of the furnaces were found. And so we don't really know. It's just a theory. But the this Dr. Eliyahu was just happy that she was managed to at least produce iron from the 3 types of ore that she fed in the furnaces, and so she'll be trying other ores, and hopefully she'll will be able to come up with some ideas about how ancient iron was produced. And so, like I said, I got all of these things from an article from the Haaretz magazine, and the author of it was a fellow by the name of Nir Hassan. Okay, so that is the moment in time part of the lesson tonight. And any comments or questions on that anybody might have? Maybe you know something more about that sort of stuff than I do. Okay. Now, are there any questions from last week? I think there was. Somebody had commented on the idea that Elisha's oh, and here's that small knife that they used, that they made up using the iron that that was smelted by a 3,000-year-old technique. Maybe they don't know if that was exactly the technique, but it worked, and they were able to make a knife that then could be sharpened. Okay, all right. So somebody had asked about, they just thought they had a little problem with the idea that that Elisha's attendant, servant, colleague, when he went and talked to Naaman out of the gifts that he was going to give to Elisha, that he got the wealth, but he also got the leprosy that came along, that had been with Naaman, and now he had it. And so it went on to him, and it says to his descendants. And the comment was, boy, that seems kind of harsh that he would just punish his descendants too. So, yeah, it is. And I don't have a real good answer for it, uh, but why God would say, yeah, we're gonna you, not only you are going to be infected with this, um, but also your all your descendants. Well, it's that's a tough thing, and I really don't know. I can't give you a good answer for that, other than the fact that maybe there weren't any, there weren't going to be any descendants beyond him, because now he's got leprosy, and so nobody, he's not going to have an opportunity to marry and have children. So I don't know. That was a question that I don't know the answer for, and I'm not going to make something up. Okay, much to my wife's delight that I wouldn't make something up. Okay, so all right. Any other comments or questions on before we get started? Okay, then let's go ahead and we'll look at these the scriptures. Now the sons of the prophets said to Elisha, "Behold, now the place where we're living in your presence is too cramped for us. So please, let's go to the Jordan, pick from there each one a beam, and make ourselves a place there to live." "Go," he answered. Then one of them said, "Will you please come with your servants?" And he says, "I will go," he answered. And so he went with them. And when they came to the Jordan, they began to cut down the trees. But as one of them was cutting down a beam, the axe head fell into the water, and he cried and said, "Ah, my master, it was borrowed." Then the man of God said, "Well, where did it fall?" And he showed him where the place, the place. So he cut off a stick and threw it in there, and the axe head floated, made the axe head float. Then he said, "Pick it up for yourself." So he reached out his hand and he took it. So now there is, um, despite the spiritual condition of Israel, the school of the prophets, they had grown larger. I mean, it was growing. So that kind of tells me that Elisha was doing a good job of being the prophet of Israel, and just trying to stem the tide of idolatry that Israel had fallen into. So the the school had grown, and they needed larger facilities, housing facilities, and but they were, school of the prophets there. They were not wealthy. These were just poor people who were studying Torah, and um, they they didn't have much money, but what they did have was they had some enthusiasm, and they were industrious people. So they planned to build their own quarters using timber that was available at the Jordan River. Now, back in those days, there was plenty of timber available for them down there, and so it kind of the idea that the axe was borrowed showed that these guys were not wealthy. They didn't have the iron. I mean, having an iron tool like that would have been it cost money, a good bit of money. And so when they borrowed this thing and he lost it, it was one of those cases where he was in a panic, because he borrowed it and would have no way of paying, reimbursing the owner for this iron axe. And so he could actually have been sold into slavery to pay off that axe. I mean, that was life back in those days. So yeah, he was pretty upset with that. And so then Elisha takes a stick, throws it in the, and throws it in the water where the axe head was. The axe head floated up, and he told his student there, he says, "Okay, go out and get it. Reach out and pick it up." He didn't, and so the student then he also had to participate. He had to go out there in the water and pick up the um, axe head, which kind of shows me then that even though God had performed a miracle, it still required this student to get up and do something. And that's a lot of times that's like for us, when God does something for us, then we really do we need to be aware that sometimes it requires our participation also. So this there's another view of this little incident here that I read. I thought, well, I'll present it to you just for for what for what it's worth, and I'm just pretty much quoting it from Thomas Constable. The expensive iron head was similar to Israel, since it was an instrument that could be used for constructive and destructive purposes. Like the axe, Israel had belonged to another, which was Egypt, but God used it for a job he had to do since the Exodus. Unfortunately, Israel had gone its own way, flown off the axe handle, and appeared lost to any further usefulness. Perhaps the water symbolizes the nations among whom Israel had sunk, since water often represents the Gentile nations elsewhere in the Old Testament. Nevertheless, God was able to restore his people to a place of usefulness again, even as Elisha restored the axe to its user. I suspect that around the fireside that night after this incident took place, Elisha explained the significance of this miracle for the sons of the prophets. From then on, they passed this story along until it became part of the folklore of Israel. Several interpreters have seen the symbolism that I have suggested in this story, as well as the other Elisha stories, but not all have, of course, and allegorists repudiate the factuality of these accounts. So there's always going to be some people that says, yeah, well, that's just a story, it didn't really happen. And so that's up to you to either believe or not believe. There are things in the Bible that are clearly allegorical. They're parables. Yeshua taught with parables. Now, did all of those things actually happen? I don't believe they did. I think they were stories that he told to make a point. And so that's basically what a parable was, and that's the people recognize that, and his disciples asked, well, why do you keep talking in parables instead of just hitting people with the truth right between the eyes? And so I think that's something that you can see, and this could very well be kind of an allegorical thing, but it was not told in that manner, so we just don't really know. Okay, anybody want to repudiate that or have any comments on that story? Because we're going to go on if you don't. Any comments or on that? Okay, now the king of Aram was warring against Israel. He consulted with his officers, saying, "In such and such a place will be my camp." But the man of God sent word to the king of Israel, saying, "Be careful not to pass this place, for the Arameans are coming down there." So the king of Israel sent word to the place the man of God told him and warned him about. And so he was on his guard there more than once or twice. And his heart upset over this matter. The king of Aram summoned his officers and said, "Tell me, which one of us is on the king of Israel's side?" But one of his officers said, "No, my lord the king. Rather, Elisha, the prophet who is in Israel, keeps telling the king of Israel the very words that you speak in your bedroom." And so he said, "Go see where he is, so that I may send and seize him." Then it was reported to him, "Behold, he is in Dothan." So he sent horses, chariots, and a great army there. They arrived at night and surrounded the city. All right, now these episodes, they seem to be skirmishes by a band of privateers or marauders. They're maybe not the real the regular army of Aram, but you know, the results of the bottom line of it was still raiding on Israeli territory. And but God kept Elisha informed as to what the of the whereabouts and what the king of Aram was doing. And time after time, it said not once or twice, more than once or twice. So you know how many times we don't know, half a dozen times. The Arameans were thwarted in their efforts. Arameans or Syrians, because they're from Damascus. The king of Aram suspected that there was a spy in his midst, you know, but his staff said, no, there's no spy. This is Elijah. This is all on Elijah, their prophet. And so the king said, okay, let's find out where he is, and we're going to go and capture him. We're going to kidnap him. And they said, well, they went and, you know, found out that he was in Dothan. So that's when they sent this big army down there to capture Elisha in Dothan. And so I think it's kind of funny in that the king, you know, the reason that he's going after Elisha was because Elisha knew everything that he was going to be doing against the people of Israel. So didn't he, it cross his mind that, you know, Elisha might know what I'm doing against him, his own person, you know, that I'm going to go and try to kidnap him, and somehow Elisha's not going to know that, you know. So who knows? I mean, it just seemed to me kind of funny that that this king would not have figured that one out. But there he was in Dothan. It's about 12 miles from Samaria. So, and here's a map. How can we get through 1 week without a map? Okay, and so Dothan is right there north of Samaria, about 12 miles there. Okay, and then keep this in mind over here where the Jordan is, because that comes in important later on in the lesson tonight. And here's Damascus way up there. All right, so let me go ahead and go with the next section of scripture. Now, when the attendant of the man of God had risen early and gone out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was surrounding the city. So his attendant said to him, alas, my master, what are we going to do? He said, well, fear not, he replied, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, Adonai, please open his eyes that he may see. Then Adonai opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. So when they came down to him, Elisha prayed to Adonai and said, please strike this people with blinding light. So he struck them with blinding light according to the word of Elisha. All right, now the attendant, okay, this guy it must be a new one. They didn't name it, they didn't give him a name, but we can pretty much say that if this part of the story of Elisha was chronological, then Gehazi was gone. You know, he was now a leper and was out of the city, out of polite society. He had to live among the lepers. And so he was gone. So his servant or his colleague, whatever, attendant, got up in the morning and, you know, got up on the roof, you know, looking around, and wow, the whole city is covered, is surrounded by the Aramean army. And so he was quite alarmed with it, and went to Elisha and said, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? A lot of hand wringing and so forth. So Elisha just calmed him down and told him, he said, no, don't worry about it, because those that are for us. We got more people than they do. And so his attendant probably looked at him and said, oh man, the old man is losing it. And so Elisha then prayed and asked God to open his eyes. And so he opened the young man's eyes, and what did he see? But that um, there was the whole area was surrounded by uh, fiery chariots and horses. It said, I mean, just everywhere around they were totally surrounded by the host of God, the Lord of hosts, and so. He saw that they were completely surrounding all the Arameans. And so we can kind of compare and contrast. Here the servant's eyes were opened up to see the army, and then at the next prayer that Elisha said was, "Okay, now Lord, all of these guys from the Arameans," he says, "send a blinding light and blind them." All right, now. The question has been asked, okay, were they blinded, like blind, so where they couldn't see, or was it a more of a supernatural kind of a thing where they were blinded as to where they were, they didn't recognize where they were, and that they were confused, they were deceived. um, I would say, my personal opinion of it was that they were deceived. It was not a physical blindness, because Elisha went down there and uh, talked to these guys and said, and so it it goes to show me then also that in this story, that it's kind of neat in that we can I think rest assured that no matter what our situation is, God's got it covered. And if we had our spiritual eyes opened, we would see that, yeah, we've got a host of heavenly beings that are kind of surrounding us and keeping us safe too. So, um, going on, then Elisha said to him, "This is not the road, nor is this the city. Follow me, and I will lead you to the man whom you seek." So he led them to Samaria. Upon their arrival in Samaria, Elisha said, "Adonai, open the eyes of these men that they may see." So Adonai opened their eyes, and they could see. Behold, they were in the middle of Samaria. When the king of Israel saw them, he said to Elisha, "Shall I surely strike them down, Avi?" And he said, "No, don't strike them down." He replied, "Would you strike down those whom you have captured with your own sword and bow? Set before them bread and water, that they may eat and drink and go back to their masters." So he prepared a great feast for them. After they had eaten and drunk, he sent them away. And when they had gone back to their master, then they went back to their master. Ever since, the marauding bands of Aram stopped invading the land of Israel. All right. So I just thought that if you haven't looked at the outline yet tonight, um, okay, I'll just give you a minute to look at that. And so this is what um, Elisha told these guys. "This is not the road, nor is this the city. I will lead you to the man whom you seek." All right. So Elisha's words, you could say, well, he's just lying to him. No, it wasn't a lie. I think you could kind of construe it as, okay, this is a ruse de guerre, a something that you do when you're at war, any way to trick the enemy. And so, but at the same time, you could look at it to say that, okay, they came down to get Elisha in his home, and of course, he wasn't home. He was actually visiting in Dothan. So he says, "Okay, this is not the place. Let me take you to the home of the guy that you're looking for." And so, um, in their unnatural state, I think that they just followed him to where, and it'd be about maybe a 3 or 4 hour walk for them to go from Dothan down to, or actually Dothan up to um, Samaria, because Dothan is on a little hill. It's in a valley, and then you go up to Samaria. It's a higher elevation, and so they get there. It brings them right smack in the middle of the city of Samaria, And but of course, at that point, they're totally surrounded by the army of Israel inside the city. And so the king asks him, he says, "Oh, okay, now what do we do? Do we go ahead and kill him?" And Elisha says, "No, no, you don't do that." He said, "Would you kill your prisoners of war?" I don't know if that's a valid question or not, because sometimes God says, "Kill them all," and but in this case, that word was not given. And generally, if God wanted them to be totally killed, it would be one of those take no prisoner kind of things. See, so all right. I just noticed that Alan jumped back on again. Last week he had problems with he dropped off, and then he couldn't get back on again. So I don't know if any of the rest of you have had that kind of a problem getting kicked off, but hopefully not. If you have, let me know, and I'll try to get with what are those guys, Zoom, and see what the problem may be. Yeah, Carl.
I think in the case of when you kill them all, it was the people that were supposed to be driven out of the land, the Hittites and the Florites and the Amorites and so on. Those, they killed them all. Aram was a neighboring country, and like Moab and Edom, those lands are you're not going to catch. So
Right.
so that's why I think that they now feed them and send them home, and now they're not going to
Well,
attack anymore.
that's
Or,
right. That's right. And if you remember that when we go to at Sukkot, I think it is Sukkot or Shavuot. Okay, I'm confused now. I don't remember which one of the feasts it was, but there is a prayer that is said traditionally, or something that the Bible says that you're supposed to recite to the priest when you bring in your basket of goodies. And one of them, the prayer, it says in there that I am or my father was a wandering Aramean, and so they hark back to those times of when Abraham was from Ur, which is an area of Aram. Okay, that's right. So these people were never under judgment by God, whereas the Canaanites, Hittites, and all of those kind of dudes were. Okay. All right. So anyway, they said no, don't kill these guys, and just feed them and send them back home. Now, it says that they never returned to uh, attack Israel again. They said the marauding bands of Aram stopped invading the land of Israel. Okay, so there's kind of a deal with words there that we need to put out there, because right in the very next verse, that was verse 23, and then in verse 24 it says, "Now it came to pass after this that King Ben-Hadad of Aram gathered all his army and marched against Samaria and besieged it." All right, so what's the deal? Well, what it is, I think, is that Aram never used that particular tactic of the marauding bands, the privateers, as it were, to go against Israel. Just kind of harassing them all the time on the borders and on the frontiers. That they just quit doing that altogether, because they saw how fruitless it was. Every time that they tried, they were defeated. So they said, "Well, we're just not going to do that tactic anymore," and they didn't. But then sometime later, it says, it came to pass after this. This would have been probably a good bit later, that Ben-Hadad of Aram gathered all his army and marched against Samaria and besieged it. Now there was um, a great famine in Samaria, since they were besieging it, until a donkey's head was sold for 80 pieces of silver, and a quarter of a cob of dove's dung for 5 pieces of silver. As the king of Israel was passing by on the wall, a woman cried out to him, saying, "My lord, the king, help!" But he said, "If Adonai doesn't help you, how can I help you? From the threshing floor, or from the wine press, how am I going to help?" Then the king asked her, "What's the matter with you?" And she answered, and I'm going to keep on reading here. Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and finish all of this scripture, this passage here, um, rather than putting it in the outline. "What's the matter with you?" He said. She answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give me your son that we may eat him today, and we will eat my son tomorrow.' So we cooked my son and ate him. The next day I told her, 'Give your son that we may eat him.' But she hid her son. So now it came to pass, when the king heard the words of this woman, that he tore his clothes as he was passing by on the wall. The people looked, and behold, he had sackcloth underneath upon his flesh. Then he said, 'My God, do to me, and even more, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains on him today.' Now Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. The king had sent a messenger ahead. Even before the messenger arrived, Elisha said to the elders, 'Do you see, this son of a murderer has sent to take away my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold the door fast against him. Is not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him?' Um, while he was yet talking with them, behold, the messenger came down to him. So the king said, 'Look, this evil is from Adonai. Why should I wait for Adonai any longer?'" And so basically, what he's saying there is, I'm done with it. I'm going to go ahead. I want to kill Elisha, because that's God's messenger. And um, so um, anyway, so we've already talked that this whole thing had started quite a few years after the marauders were sent home. This time, though, it was with a full army. They came with a big army, everything, and it was a siege army, and to the point that it was so large that they disrupted the entire countryside around that. And okay, again, this would be around Samaria, okay, in Ephraim. It probably did not encompass all those big areas of Manasseh and Dan and Reuben and Gad and all those, because it was around Samaria. But that area that they surrounded Samaria was so uh, conclusive. I mean, it was a big deal that there were no crops that were produced in that area, and of course no supplies coming in or out of or into the city of Samaria. So it was a bad condition, to the point where it gave the price of a donkey's head. Well, you got to remember, a donkey, of course, is a valuable commodity to these people. It's a beast of burden. But not only that, a donkey is an unclean animal. They can't eat a donkey. And yet here it was, they'd already eaten up the donkey, and now they're just trying to figure out, okay, now what possible flesh we can get out of a donkey's head. And a donkey's head was expensive, and it said it was 80 pieces of silver. Well, you think, wow, that's a lot of money for a donkey's head. Well, then you get down to where it says there's a quarter of a cob of dove's dung. Now, what in the world? That's terrible that they're going to eat. I don't even know what a quarter of a cob is, and of pigeon pucky that they're going to sit there and eat, uh, and it's going to cost them 5 pieces of silver. So then, when the king finds out that this woman had actually resorted to cannibalism, they had eaten her son, and then back in the story there, where the other woman hid her son. Well, I mean, this was just too much for the king. Even knucklehead like Joram there he was moved by that. He was mortified by that. He tore his clothes, and people could see he had sackcloth underneath his clothes. So they knew this was bad when the king loses it, and so he swears that he's going to get Elisha. And but there again, didn't he think that if Elisha knew the plans of the king of Aram, then he would certainly know the plans of Joram, who was the king of Israel, who was right there in the same town with him. So that's it would have been foolish of him to think that he was gonna take down Elisha, but man, he's the king, so he thinks he can do what he wants to. All right, so going ahead then, or we won't finish. Got a whole nother chapter in chapter 7, verse 1. Any comments or questions before we start this next chapter? Okay, so what this is just a connection. This is actually a continuation of chapter 6, and probably that it should have been these should have tailed on to the end of chapter 6 instead of starting a new chapter, but it is what it is. Then Elisha said, "Hear the word of Adonai. Thus says Adonai, tomorrow about this time a measure of fine flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." Then the officer on whose hand the king was leaning responded to the man of God, saying, "Look, even if Adonai should make heaven windows in heaven, could this thing happen?" He announced, "Behold," he announced, Elisha announced, "Behold, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat of it." All right. So Elisha, he's confronted with the king and his messenger there, and he says, "All right, well, tomorrow, you will see these prices have just totally fallen down to zip nada. They're going to go back to the normal prices before the siege. You'll see it tomorrow." And this officer, uh, he mocked God. He mocked Elisha. Told him that even if God opened up the windows of heaven, poured out the blessing, and that was kind of a common colloquialism, because even God uses it later on, and he says he says, try me, will I not open up the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing to you? And so this was a common saying. Everybody would have known if the windows of heaven were open, then the blessings are going to flow out. And so he mocked God, and Elisha said, "Okay, buddy, you're going to see it, but the irony of it is you won't be able to eat a bit of it. You're going to die hungry." So going ahead with verse 3. Now there were 4 men with sarat, leprosy, at the entrance of the gate. They couldn't go into the city. And they said to one another, "Why should we sit here till we die? If we say, 'Let's go into the city,' then the famine is in the city, so we will die there. But if we sit still here, we will die also. So come on, let's go down to the camp, go to the camp of the Arameans. If they spare us, we'll live. If they will kill us, we'll just die, because we're going to die anyway." So they got up at twilight to go to the camp of the Arameans. But when they arrived at the edge of the Aramean camp, behold, no one was there. So, are you ready for a miracle? Here we go. These 4 guys with sarat, and they would have been restricted. They really should not have been in the city. I mean, they couldn't go in the city. They can just stand outside and beg, and hopefully the people will give them something to eat. Um, and so they were starving. I mean, you can imagine if it's that bad in the city that they're eating their own children, that these lepers were they were in a bad way too, because they would have been on the outside of any kind of sustenance anyway, and so now it's even worse for them. So they decided, look, if we stay here, if we could go in the city, we're going to die. And because they're dying in there, they're starving in there. If we stay here at the gate, we're going to die because nobody's coming and going. And so let's just go down to the Arameans. And if they give us some food, okay. But if they don't, then we're going to die, which is we're going to do anyway. So they said, well, let's go down there. And, if we go see the Arameans, you know, then they might possibly die. Whereas they stayed right there where they were going to die, undoubtedly. So they were actually the very first to see the miracle. So, for Adonai had caused the army of the Arameans to hear a noise of chariots and a noise of horses, indeed a noise of a huge army. So they said one to another, look, the king of Israel has hired against us the kings of the Hittites and the kings of the Egyptians to assault us. So they got up and fled at twilight, abandoning their tents, their horses, their donkeys, and the entire camp just as it was, and fled for their lives. All right. So here again, God comes to the rescue with what? Just a big noise. And a big noise changes people. At the day of Pentecost, the people heard the sound of a mighty rushing wind. They didn't hear a rushing. They didn't hear a rushing wind. I mean, they didn't see it or feel it or anything. They just heard the sound of a mighty rushing wind. And at this point, God made the sound of a mighty army rushing down on them. And so the Arameans said, oh man, we're in a bind, we're in trouble. So they took off and ran for the hills. And there was, of course, no other army, but they left everything that they had. Now, they just assumed that the king of Israel was somehow able to hire mercenaries to come against them, and they fled, left the entire camp just as it was. All right, and I forgot to move to the next. And so they even left their horses and donkeys. I mean, these guys were in such a terror that they didn't even take time to bridle and saddle their horses to get out of the camp. They just ran and left the horses and the donkeys there. So the whole idea of their fear was, I mean, it was huge. They left. All right, and when these men with Sarat came to the edge of the camp, they entered into one tent, ate and drank, then took from their silver, gold, and clothes, and went and hid them. Then, when they returned, they went to another tent and took from there too, and went and hid them. Then they said to each other, "You know what? This is not right. What we're doing. This day is a day of good news, and we're keeping silent. If we wait until the morning." Light, punishment will overtake us. Let's go now and report to the king's household. So they um, they did exactly what lepers do, what any of us in their position would have done when they go into this place and they see that the camp is totally abandoned. And they go into the first tent, they look and wow, there's food and there's gold and silver and clothing, and oh my goodness, so we can get rid of our filthy beggar rags, and we can um, have these new clothes. And so they did. They looted, and then they went and hid their stuff. And then they came back and they went to another tent, and yeah, they did the same thing again. They looted it all up, and then loaded the loot, and then they went and hid it again. And so um, even though these guys were lepers, they still had a conscience. There was something deep down inside them that says, you know what? We're doing something wrong here, because um, we're taking all this food where our brothers up there up in Samaria, they're starving to death. We've got to go back. And he says, plus, if we're found out and they knew that we were doing this, then we'd really be punished. So let's go and report to the king's household. So they went They knew they had to go um, to report this. Now, okay, so I'm going to read then from verse 10 to 20, and I've only got the first one here um, because um, we just go ahead and tell the whole story. So they came and called out to the city gatekeepers, and told them, "We went to the camp of the Arameans, and look, there was not a single soul there, no human voice, just the horses and the donkeys tied up, and the tents just as they were." Then the gatekeepers called out, and it was reported to the royal palace inside. When the king got up in the night, he said to his courtiers, "Let me tell you now what the Arameans have contrived against us. They know we are hungry." So they went out of the camp to hide themselves in the field, thinking, "When they came out of the city, we'll capture them alive and get into the city." But one of his courtiers answered and said, "Please let some men take 5 of the remaining horses left in the city. Look, they are just like the whole multitude in it. And look, they will be just like the whole multitude of Israel that has already perished. So let's send and see." So they took 2 horses and 2 chariots with horses, and the king sent them after the army of the Arameans, saying, "Go and see." They went after them to the Jordan, and behold, all the way was strewn with clothes and equipment which the Arameans had thrown away in their haste. So then the messenger returned and reported to the king. All right, now um, these lepers, they told the guards told the king, and so his idea was, "Nope, nope. Let me tell you what this is." Or they're wanting this. It's a they're trying to set us up. It's a trap. They're wanting us to get outside the city, and then they can jump on us and capture us and take the city. And so I'm not going to do it. So one of his men, though, said, "Look, we got 5 horses. That's all we got left in the entire city. Let me take 2 chariots, and because if we go out there and they kill us, well, they're going to die anyway. If we stay here, they're going to die anyway. So we might as well go and see." So the king said, "All right, go." And so they went after them all the way to the Jordan, it said. And remember what I said, this was a large siege army. They would have stayed, their main headquarters probably would have been back there at the Jordan, where they would have had better uh, that had water and so forth. Whereas had they stayed up there in the mountains, it would have been a little bit more spotty. But they so it's still quite a few miles from Samaria down to the Jordan. And so when the messengers got there, they saw it, and so they came and returned to the king, and they reported it back to the king. And so the people went out and ransacked the camp of the Arameans. Then a measure of fine flour was sold for a shekel, and 2 measures of barley for a shekel, just as was the word of Adonai. Now the king appointed the officer on whose hand he leaned, as his second in command there, to have charge of the gate. But the people trampled him on him at the gate, and he died, just as the man of God had said, who spoke when the king came down to him. For when the man of God had spoken to the king, 2 measures of barley for a shekel and a measure of fine flour for a shekel will be tomorrow about this time at the gate of Samaria. That officer had answered the man of God and said, "Look, even if Adonai would make windows in heaven, could such a thing happen?" And then he replied, "Behold, you will see it with your own eyes, but will not eat any of it." That that's what happened to him, for the people trampled on him at the gate, and he died. This retelling of that is typical of Middle Eastern literature at the time, where just to make sure that you got the point about this whole thing, it was repeated a second time. Okay. Let me turn this. Okay, now, so the people, as soon as they heard it, boy, they took off, because they're dying, they're starving, and the idea that the Arameans had left food out there and all of the other stuff. This was a large siege army. They had been there for a while, And so, yes, there was a lot of food. They carried a lot of food. These armies, when they would go someplace, these guys carried, maybe they didn't have any other possessions anywhere, but they would carry their booty, any kind of loot that they got on their travels, they carried it with them. So there would have been riches out there, and certainly a lot of food. And so basically that siege was broken. The famine was broken. And the crowds just came pouring out of the city. And the officer that had mocked God and mocked Elisha was just trampled. Just run over. I mean, this was worse than Black Friday, at Walmart. And so he just ran over them, and or he was run over by them and was killed, just like Elisha said that prophecy was true. And with that, I've finished up. It's time. Are there any comments or questions that you might have on this story, this portion that we just finished? Nothing? No comments or questions. Well, okay, then I will close off. Ed, you got something? Or Colette, one of the two.
No, it was accident. I'm sorry.
Okay. Then I'm going to go ahead and um, just say Shavuot Tov. We'll cut the live stream.